Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Kelly, CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications. Thank you for tuning in today. I want to say welcome to LaFonsi Galleries. They're a full-service contemporary art gallery and frame shop serving the Midwest for the last 4 decades, and they're our new member of the week. So welcome to them and their team. All right, Brian, we have a lot of reports and stats to cover today. And let's start with one about the roads. A few weeks ago, you covered some stats that showed our road spending is not fixing as many miles as expected. And now the annual trip report is out. So how much are these bad roads costing us as drivers?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways you can look at the cost of roads. And when Bridge Michigan did a nice report on what we're getting for all the additional spending, you see inflation has hit road construction as hard or harder than anything else that you can find out there. So about 50% more in spending is only leading to about 5% increase in fixed roads. The the annual trip report, this is a national organization that shows what is the additional cost per driver of roads in each state according to the condition of those roads. And in Michigan, it came out to $17 billion overall. 5.9 billion can be attributed to additional vehicle operating costs as a result of driving on rough roads. And 40% of 40% of major state and local maintained roads and highways in Michigan are in the poor or mediocre condition categories, according to that report. So if you were to just kind of do the math, so how many drivers are out there and what's the cost per driver, you can about $758 is the cost per driver per year in the because of the road conditions. So this is one that we look out for every year, and then it seems like there's a lot of road construction. There's a lot of road construction out there right now, but unfortunately, the progress being made overall on the entire system is not keeping up very well. Now it said that, let's see here, the average was $758, but drivers in Detroit and Flint pay more as they have the highest percentage of poorly rated roads at 53%. The Lansing area has the next highest percentage of poor roads at 40%. And then followed by the Saginaw Bay City Midland area at 39%. In terms of the highest percentage of roads that are rated as good in Michigan, that was 59% of the roads in the Traverse City region.
All right, I was just up that way over the weekend, and yes, I think I can see a difference. All right, let's talk about a new report from the Michigan Retailers Association. Their May index is now out, and is it showing additional slowing?
Yeah, this is one that we look at every single month. So this is the Michigan Retailers Association that has an index, and the retailers in Michigan report into the association whether their sales are increasing or decreasing. And so having a retail index above 50% is considered to be strong or positive, growing. Below 50% negative or shrinking. And the index came in at 43.3% in May, and or I'm sorry, in June, down from 47% in May. So even May had come down, and then June down even further. And then 42% of businesses reported an increase in May or over May, compared to 49% that said that there was a sales decrease in that time period. 9% saying no change. So, as we'd looked at a lot of kind of crosswinds, we had started picking up real early in the year or the end of last year some from smaller retailers really concerned or struggling with sales. And this the index from the state association has really mirrored that and appears to be continuing to slow.
All right, one of the other issues we've talked about here on the briefing is the housing shortage in Michigan and the high costs of housing. And so now the National Association of Home Builders has released a study quantifying a major source of the cost. What does it show?
Yeah, what the National Association Home Builders does each year is they'll look at what's the average cost of a new home, and then how much of that cost is directly attributed to government regulation. So not just like permit costs, that's one thing, but it's actually relatively small compared to other costs. There are lots of requirements on how a house has to be built, the type of materials that you have to use. And all of them on their own sound really good. Usually it's for incrementally make something a little more safe or making something a little more efficient. But of course, all of these things add up on these requirements. So nationwide, the average cost of a new home is 397 to build a new home, $397,300. Of that, 23.8% or $93,870. So almost $100,000 of the cost of a new home are because of the regulations around how you have to build a new home. And again, if you look at any of these regulations kind of in isolation, you'll find that um, they sound like they're good things. There's something just incrementally. Do this and make it a little more efficient. Do this and make it a little more efficient still. But it piles up on the costs, and the National Association has put a dollar figure to it, and it is huge. So part of this discussion around the housing shortage and the related question about affordability, government regulations, at least not making it any worse, should probably be part of that discussion.
All right, some other issues we've talked about on the show quite often are related to education and workforce development. And then there's also this debate over the cost of college. And so Bridge, Michigan recently published some average income stats for college grads. What does that show us?
Yeah, this is one. It's kind of a hard topic sometimes, especially with our audience. We have a lot of entrepreneurs that never went to college and then have been wildly successful. But just playing the averages and what does a workforce need? What do people or what do employers need out of individuals going entering into and being productive as part of the workforce? What do they have to know, and what are their earning potentials? The difference turns out is pretty stark between college and no college. So federal, so I'll talk about federal and then the federal data and then some averages here in Michigan. Um, it shows that Michigan Public University graduates, their earnings 5 years after graduation range, depending on what their course of study is, from 50,000, 49,757 through to about 85,800. So that's the range 5 years out, depending on which uh, specialty or degree you pursue. But fewer people are pursuing are choosing college. There's been, especially in very recent years, mainly with the cost. So the cost, and is this really worth it given um, how much it costs relative to what you can make? And so there's kind of a sticker shock price to college. Actually, kind of going through that now. I've got one in college myself. The Michiganders with a bachelor's degree. So if you're to look at not just 5 years out, but just generally speaking, Michiganders with a bachelor's degree have a median wage of 63,100. Those with a high school diploma only have a median wage of 29,700. So there's a $33,000 gap between the two of them. So as I think about like paying a tuition bill and that type of annual gap that accumulates over a person's life. Now, there's a lot of factors that go into that, but as Bridge put this together, they're really good on data. Just playing the averages, there does appear to be a lot, and from an earnings potential standpoint, appears to be a lot of value in the difference between those who have and those who have not. Keeping in mind, there's lots of other things like a person who has like, just the determination and the ability to problem solve and stick with it and go through the college process and give an authority figure what they want and to go through ups and downs and still get the job done. I mean, there's a lot of characteristics that a person going through college either has to have or picks up through the process that are useful in the workforce after the fact. So these stats are not necessarily causation. It could be correlation, but still pretty important.
Absolutely. Okay, we did talk a little bit about Enbridge with Kelly a few weeks ago, but the case on line 5 has been heating up. And so what's the latest since that conversation?
So there are a bunch of different aspects to the case. The most recent thing is that Enbridge had essentially countersued the state and federal court, and you can go to the federal court sometimes to say, "Hey, a state or local government isn't doing what they're supposed to do." And the state tried to get that dismissed. It was in federal court, Michigan's Western District, actually in front of Judge Yonker, who was looking at another case that SBAM has filed against the IRS. And the Judge Yonker found that the state was unable to establish sovereign immunity grounds that trigger a dismissal. In other words, their uh, effort to get the lawsuit against the state dismissed was denied. But there are exceptions to the sovereign immunity rule that it was noted in Judge Yonker's decision, including one that allows for federal litigation if it's necessary to force a state official to comply with federal law. And he determined that Enbridge's filing squarely falls under that exception. So this is really an effort to try to compel Michigan to move forward in following law. This is one of the reasons why it's always seemed a little bit awkward to have so much state action, considering that there are federal treaties at work here between the U.S. and our largest trading partner, Canada, in addition to the reliance that our economy has on the pipeline itself. So I expect there'll be lots of twists and turns between now and the end, but this was I think, a pretty big loss for the state. In other words, they weren't able to, it doesn't mean that the state ultimately will lose the lawsuit, but it just means that they'll at least have to justify their actions and their denials.
All right, next up on today's agenda is General Motors, and they're paying the feds a huge fine. Tell us why.
Now you hear these, ever heard this term CAFE standard? It's a fuel efficiency requirement. And so the federal government, usually through the rulemaking process, will increase what the automakers have to comply with. What is the fuel efficiency? And then also the CO2 or the carbon dioxide emissions from their vehicles. And they do testing and they report back to the state and they're certified under a certain type of emission standard. And it was determined that in the models for General Motors between 2012 and 2018, that their emissions rate of carbon dioxide averaged 10% higher than what it was supposed to. And so it was announced last week that there was a $145.8 million penalty that General Motors will be paying to the federal government. I thought, obviously, with General Motors being a Michigan headquartered company and it being such an important part of the industry here in Michigan, worthy of note. But it is also kind of an interesting kind of insertion into this discussion about where a lot of auto companies are saying, hey, it's really expensive to make these electric vehicles. The market hasn't come on as strong as what the government and maybe some of the automakers were hoping. As they start to scale back because it's too expensive, and they're losing money on the electric vehicles. The government is actually making it more expensive to not make electric vehicles. So in other words, electric vehicles are one of the cures that General Motors could pursue to lower their CO2 emissions of the fleet. And so I think these things are probably kind of related. You know, the desire of the industry to maybe slow their roll a little bit on electrification, and the Fed saying, if you do, we're going to be pretty aggressive. I'll let you know we're going to be aggressive on these CAFE standards, and if you and maybe you're not going to be able to meet them without additional electrification. So more than posturing. That's a real find. I hadn't ever seen one like that size before.
All right, finally, let's talk about the political turmoil out there. I think that might be putting it lightly. But underneath that all, we do have congressional and Senate races. So what's the latest? What are the key races?
Yeah, I think I had mentioned a few weeks ago that I was a little surprised when Hillary Scholten from Michigan had had called for Joe Biden to step down from the nomination, because normally she does it, and she's one of the first in the nation to do so. And that kind of clued me into, like, must be that President Biden is really kind of holding down the ticket in West Michigan for the Democrats, and they just want to get him out and then a fresh start with somebody else. And so that was kind of on my radar screen, that the congressional and the down ticket races for the Democrats were maybe concerned about the president being a drag on the entire ticket. Now, of course, famously, now the president had stepped aside from that nomination. There was big pressure from donors. They had stopped giving to the Biden campaign before, but what really, I think, amped up the pressure was that they stopped giving to all the other Democrats too, saying, well, if he's going to be at the top of the ticket, we're not going to support any of you. And all of a sudden, everybody started pushing on Biden, and finally he did step aside. Now, there's been a tremendous amount of enthusiasm. I'd say even surprising amount of enthusiasm around the vice president as a replacement nomination. So you see the Democrats getting pretty excited. The Republicans were already pretty amped up and excited as well. So now all of a sudden, this looks like a really close, kind of heated back and forth. And I think we should expect this race to be one that is where the outcome really isn't known until the end. Underneath all of that, you have the United States Senate, United States Congress, and in the Senate, of course, there's 100 senators, so it's right now there's 51 Democrats and 49 Republicans, but you've got a couple of seats that are probably going to flip the Republican way in this election. Most pundits believe. Take, for example, Joe Manchin in West Virginia is not running for re-election. That seat is most certainly going to flip. And then and there's some thought about Ohio, another one that had kind of moved rightward. But then you got some other races where even when the top of the ticket, the Trump over Biden, and now with Kamala Harris, maybe or maybe not, we'll see with new polling. But where the statewide Democrats in states like Michigan and Wisconsin were holding up pretty well. So the same states, most of the same states that you hear about all the time with respect to the presidential race, those states that will decide the presidential race, they're probably going to be the states, including Michigan, that decides control of Congress, including the Senate and the House. So I think you should look for several of the races in Michigan to be on the national radar screen. Of course, the race to replace Debbie Stabenow, and there's still an active primary on both sides, but polling looks kind of like Slotkin and Rogers are running away with their nominations. And then in the House, you've got the 3rd Congressional District over in Grand Rapids. You've got the Saginaw, Genesee Bay, Midland area where Kildee is retiring, and a very active race there, which looks like it could be pretty close, and where SBAM's headquarters is, that Lansing-centric seat. a couple of political veterans that are running against each other there, and Curtis Hertel and Tom Barrett. So there's a lot to be said for what's happening in Michigan, and when you consider that the House and the Senate are so evenly divided, states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Georgia, Nevada, Arizona. Uh, these are the states where you're going to see um, these congressional races settled, and I think will, at the end of the day, determine control of Congress. I should mention too, so it's because I already talked about two branches of government. President put the third branch of government on the table today too, with a proposal to put term limits on the United States Supreme Court. That's of course, a really would be a massive change in the system, which frankly I don't think has any real chance of passing, but clearly is a response to um, the just the series of things that has led to a rightward shift of the policy and more kind of traditional, classic liberal approach in the of the current Supreme Court, and the fact that these are lifetime appointments, and so I think the political system tends not to be patient, and is maybe looking for a way to shorten the tail on that. So that I think, I mean, it's politically very interesting, not likely to pass. I think the real action in this election, obviously the presidential election, but the control of the House and Senate, frankly, while it seems like Republicans maybe have a little bit of an edge at the moment, we're still a long way out of the election, and it does seem like things are more even now with Biden stepping aside, and the race at the top of the ticket maybe evening out a little bit more than what it looked just a few weeks ago.
All right, well, thanks, Brian. I saw or heard this morning it's 99 days until the general election. So the countdown is on. But a reminder that SBAM has endorsed for the Michigan House of Representative seats, that those are on our website, and primaries are next Tuesday. Actually, I think early voting has already started here in Michigan. So if you go to the advocacy tab on our website, you'll see all of our endorsements for the open seats for the Michigan House of Representatives. Also, a quick note, we have our golf outing coming up on August 15th. So if you're a golfer, we'd love to have you there. And as a reminder, you can see all of our events, webinars, owner to owner, in-person events at sfam.org. Have a great week, and we will be back here next Monday.
Thanks, everybody. See you next week.